Welcome, Christine Laperriere. How are you?
I am great. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Are you ready to
Mm.
pour into our listeners?
Absolutely.
So, share with us your leadership journey and tell us what you're doing now.
Well, my name is Christina, and I have been running a business called Leader in Motion out of Toronto, Ontario for the last 16 years. My journey is kind of interesting. So, I started my career with an undergrad and master's degree in mechanical engineering. So, my first job out of school, as one does, was as a design engineer for Chrysler. And basically, after chasing lots and lots of parts and solving lots of complex problems, I realized that I had much more passion for people and solving complex people problems. So I went into management consulting, and it's where I got to start to do real business and people transformation work, and I was hooked. So 2008 started my own business, and today do leadership transformation work. The name of the business came at such a kind of an organic moment. So I was in management consulting, and I was so frustrated because I was trying to sell a couple of ideas into the CEO of the business that I worked for, and he was a Harvard MBA. And I'd walk into his office, floor to ceiling business books. He had read every book out there. And I kept coming to him saying, listen, I have all this talent. I want to share it with this business. And here's a couple proposals of how I want to do that. And I'm trying to pitch these ideas. I basically wanted to sell them to build a leadership development arm onto the side of our transformation business. He kept knocking my ideas down for fun, and it was really frustrating. I went back multiple times, kept pitching ideas. I was so passionate and engaged, and I just couldn't understand why I couldn't get the idea over the line. And I remember at one point coming out of a meeting and thinking to myself, he's sitting there with a library of business books behind him. He has a Harvard MBA. Like, what business book did he read that said it's a great idea to take a high performing, super engaged employee and just knock down ideas for fun? And so I did resign. And I had a moment in that moment of frustration one day where I thought, it's not what you've read, not knowledge you've acquired. It's literally the knowledge you apply in motion. So, in that meeting, in that interaction, do you apply any of those hundreds of books of knowledge that you've acquired? And so that's where Leader in Motion, I remember looking it up and the name was available, and I went, that's the name of the business.
Wow, it's so funny when you mentioned that you were an engineer. It just made sense to me because we can get our hands on leaders and help transform them. There's a lot of problems we would have solved. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So when I started Leader in Motion, I was really focused on sales transformation. And it was my favorite because you had people, you had behavior, but you also have process, creating an outcome or performance. So I love to be able to isolate what are those two pieces? What are people opportunities where we coach and build performance? What is process, right? Anybody that's worked in sales knows there's heavy sales process involved. And then how do we create an outcome or performance? But naturally, it just kept bleeding into leadership. At the end of the day, everything that I was working on, really the source of most problems I couldn't solve were at the leadership level. And so I began coaching the leaders much closer and getting involved. So today I work with private equity firms, I have banks, financial institutions, it's insurance. I've got a handful of large customers. And what I typically do is take anywhere from 10 to 20 of their top middle management, and I do a management mastermind series, and I privately coach each one of those individuals. So today I coach about 100 leaders a year. The magic to me is the middle of the organization gets missed the most. We assign executive coaches to the senior most level, but I feel like the middle of the house, the ones who are trying to really manage and enable the business to perform well, while they're also dealing with pressure from up above, I feel like that is where I have the most passion and excitement, right for the middle of the organization.
So you're doing that at the same time doing the top leadership.
So I typically act as a trusted advisor to the senior level. So what's neat is if you work with 15 to 20 of the top management level, so let's call it manager to vice president level of an organization, and you're really sitting kind of right in the center of the meat. By nature, you can become a really good trusted advisor to the senior executive table because I have a very good sense for what's going on. I have a very good sense for how the senior executive leadership is actually influencing the rest of the organization. So I don't typically coach at the C-suite level. I actually avoid it, but I really try to be a trusted advisor that gives candid observations and advice so that I can help enable them to make better decisions.
All right. So I heard also you wrote a book and you have a podcast. Tell us about that.
The first passion project started with my own experience. So I'll take you back in time a little bit. So in 2008, when I was in management consulting, I moved up the ladder pretty quickly. So I had finally acquired enough knowledge that I was seen as a leader, and they started to assign me teams to build. And I loved this. This is my favorite part. So, management consulting by nature is very long hours, very cutthroat. It's a pretty intense thing. You're going into an organization and you're literally trying to create change in a 20-week cycle. So, it's not for the faint at heart.
Mhm.
And I had so much passion for developing people. So they'd always give me brand new consultants, very green, often in their 20s. And they said, okay, here you go. This is the team you're working with. Good luck. And I was always, this is great. Give me people and I will make it happen. So I would be up early coaching and working with people. I'd be trying to help them get ready for the work we were doing. And I got promoted a few times and hit a point where I had reached think it was a senior manager role where all of a sudden they assigned me a client in Canada and a client in the US, and I had green teams. So the thing was is that I had great trained people on every project, and the more senior folks would come along, steal my trained people and give me a fresh team. I took it as a compliment, but I didn't quite understand how exhausting it was. And ultimately what was happening is I stopped taking care of myself. I stopped exercising. I stopped eating right. And I would just work harder. I would work longer hours. I would work weekends. And ultimately, I started to burn out, but I didn't know what burnout was. So I kind of started to beat up on myself during that burnout. And I would say, well, God, you're just weak. They're going to find out you're not made for this job or you're not actually as good as you have given off the perception of being. Right. And so I started to have imposter syndrome. I started to fear that everyone was going to find out I really wasn't strong enough for the position that they had promoted me to. And as that burnout started to happen, I was waking up in the morning, I'd get tears in my eyes. I remember I started to take my mascara to work with me and put it out in the parking lot because I would kind of find myself crying on the way to work a lot of the times, just feeling like, I don't know if I can handle this anymore. And the real turning point, I woke up one day and I remember thinking, I need a break, but it can't just be a weekend or a vacation. It needs to be a big break. And for a moment, this is a very kind of embarrassing, vulnerable moment, but I remember thinking, oh, if I could just get sick. And the thought of cancer crossed my mind, which is crazy to me. I just needed a break and I needed permission from the outside world to take a break. And that's how I knew my mental health had really, truly gone to mental illness. Like to me, that was kind of the breaking point. And so I remember kind of processing that and going like, I've reached dark. This isn't healthy. And reflected on it for a few weeks and went into my boss and said, I'm going to take 6 or 8 weeks off, unpaid. I'm not asking anybody to pay me. I just need a break. And he said, well, it's not a good time. By the way, it's never a good time. And he said, what if I don't want to give you a break? And I said, well, then I quit. And he said, well, I guess I'm going to give you a break. But he was not happy about it. And so the most powerful thing is that there's so much in what I learned next that it ended up being one of the biggest gifts of my life to go through this experience. And years later, I got asked to teach a session for a women executive series. And I decided to share this story. And so many people came up to me and said, I've laid in bed and dreamt of getting sick. One woman came up to me in tears and said, this was me, like this morning. This is how I felt. And so it became really important to me to somehow package what I had learned about managing stress and managing my energy. And I started to coach and teach a lot about it. And it turned into a book called Too Busy to Be Happy. So many of us who are high performing, highly committed, really engaged, how is it that we have that experience where we just feel we are truly too busy to be happy? We're putting happy on postpone.
Isn't it interesting? I had this similar experience where I did experience burnout. My body completely shut down. And it was one of the scariest things. But it's an important story to tell because there's so many people, but women in particular, we just go, 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 go. And then there's so much put on us as well. And there's so much that we do take on. And so the story is important because self-care is important. Now, you spoke about energy. I'm sure listeners are leaning in saying, oh my God, I needed this.
Mhm. Yeah, there was this really interesting moment. So when I think of too busy to be happy, you'll see there's kind of a new term that I introduce. And I'll even give you the backstory for a second. So I remember working with this like very condescending Texan when I was in the consulting world. And I remember him kind of talking down to one of my team members. And he says, Diana, I don't have the emotional real estate for this conversation right now. And he was just like kind of talking down to her. And I remember thinking, man, you are such a jerk, but I really like that term, emotional real estate. So I stole it fair and square from the Texan. And it's funny because when I was healing from burnout, well, I had many aha moments and I wrote about all of them. The first is that I like to think of my emotional real estate as what I kind of call the front yard of the house. So if all the mechanics of what's going on up here is the house, to me, the front yard of that house is my emotional real estate. And I think of how I manage that emotional real estate all the time. So each thing that I decide I'm going to spend mental energy thinking about, worrying about, preparing for, working on is a fraction of my emotional real estate. And so what I realized is when I was going through burnout, I wasn't letting anything go. So every employee that liked or didn't like me, every leader that liked or didn't like, okay, then I had a client that had a perception and I was taking all of that on and I was truly out of emotional real estate. I was just cramming more stuff in to hold on to. And so I, first of all, am today very rigorous about what I choose to allocate emotional real estate. I say I treat it just like time and just like money. So to me, I work with a world of three factors: time, money, and emotional real estate. Those are the three things that I make a decision off of. The second thing that I think is really important is lots of things use up emotional real estate, but I stopped prioritizing the things that give back emotional real estate. And so there's this amazing physics of how emotional real estate works. And I'll use the example last night, went out with two really close friends for a happy hour close by. That gave me back emotional real estate. Those 2 hours of sitting with two really close friends and just catching up on a Tuesday night gave me back emotional real estate. It gave me something in the tank to come home and work with. And so it's interesting because you can also create a lot of extra emotional real estate by doing the things that give back the energy. I kind of found self care in a way at the time. It was always like, okay, be sure to meditate, be sure to do yoga, be sure to get your exercise. Well, what was happening is I was just adding that stuff to my to do list. And it was making me more stressed and feel like a bigger failure at the end of the day for not getting those things done. So I really needed to rethink how I was approaching it because, for example, my happy hour with my two friends, you could call it self-care, maybe, but to me it feels wildly indulgent. There was prosecco at the table. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it wasn't for my physical health, which I often use as my work-life balance equation. Back in the day, I would kind of think, well, if it wasn't exercise, it didn't really count. But meanwhile, I started paying more attention to what things give back emotional real estate, what has a higher return on investment than what it takes. And that's a great way to offset the weight of all the things that we carry on a regular basis.
And all that stuff is very personal and everyone's different.
Right.
You have to explore because no one can really tell you. They can give you ideas, right? I'm big on grounding. We're a battery and we need, to ground ourselves. And I love that concept of replenishing. For me, it would be the conversation.
Actually, to your point, I purposely, in the name of the book, in the second line of the book, I talk about, using emotional real estate to grow your work life wisdom. And I threw out the word work life balance because I just decided it really didn't fit. And I don't think it fits for a lot of people. It gives the wrong visual. What I did is work life wisdom is highly customized and it's highly customizable to the age and stage of life. So, I have kids that are 7 and 9, and work life wisdom for me is having dinner with them at this age and at this stage and being home a certain number of nights a week. If I'm home 3 nights a week for dinner with my kids, it helps me stay at peace with the fact that I feel like I'm living the role of a mother the way I want to. I can't be at home 5 nights a week, given that I'm the breadwinner and I'm on site with clients. But I had to come up with like, what is my boundary that works for this stage of life and it fits into my work life wisdom. A glass of Prosecco might work for mine right now. There's definitely been times where it doesn't. And so it can be so customizable if we actually tell people, what is your work life wisdom? What is the thing that gives back more energy than it takes for you? Because it is different for all of us.
It's really important because as successful as you were before this burnout, you investing in you has up leveled how you coach and the effect you have on other people because of how you take care of you first.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a quality to certain leaders that you meet where they're powerhouses, but they don't look like they're working that hard at it. You know, when I have spent a lot of time on big panels and talking to leaders, and sometimes it's facilitating in my own show, things like that. And I'll find that there's this quality to powerful leaders that do feel grounded. They feel grounded when you're talking to them. If I dig in, most times they've learned how to manage their emotional real estate. They have a system. They just don't have the words sometimes to tell you how they do it. But I've talked to CEOs of banks who will say, well, I've never made one of my kids' dentist appointments, but I never miss a soccer game. And they'll walk you through these like 32 different line items. I always make my walk in the morning with the dog. Very rarely do I make it to the company holiday party. They'll talk through the way that they prioritize what gives them back the right amount of energy. I always say being successful at more than one thing at a time, being able to say, I feel like a successful mom and a successful best friend and a successful business owner. How do you feel successful at multiple things at once? To me, that's work life wisdom. Not just saying, oh, my career is going to get all my energy at this stage, and next stage, my kids are going to get all my energy.
Love it. Now you have a podcast and I love the name Best Boss Ever.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes, absolutely. So you can find it on Spotify, you can find it on Apple, very easy to track down. Best Boss Ever. And it became the second passion project that I took on. So I wrote Too Busy to Be Happy, still coaching about 100 leaders a year. And one of the things that started to bother me is the mediocre expectation we set on managers. Like when you look at leadership training, a lot of it is like trying to keep you out of being a worse boss, but
Mm,
not really focused on what a best boss is. And I found that, you know, as many of my friends will tell you, I'm the one that will leave my friends at a dinner and end up talking to a complete stranger because they have a great best boss ever story. So sometimes somebody will start to tell me about where they've worked and what they've done. And next thing you know, they're telling me about the best boss they ever had. And I am just completely riveted by the conversation. And so when I created Best Boss Ever, I thought, you know what? I just want conversations that are going to make me a better coach to all of these leaders. And I really want to distill out the quality of not an average manager or somebody that you like to work with or who is good enough, but I wanted to capture the leaders that are just game changing, the ones that you're like, you know, when I wake up, I try to think, what would that manager do? Or they're the person that changed the way I think about everything. I really wanted to capture those stories because the best bosses, they do something very different than the rest. And I was trying to figure out how do I extract that? And so currently working on a book to capture some of that, but I've done 70 of those interviews now and really been able to extract some really good juice out of 70 different examples. And these aren't CEOs, these are everyday managers, directors, your everyday leader that shows up, comes into the office, has a team, and is just trying to help that team do great work and enjoy their life at the same time. So, you know, I also like that too. We studied those great leaders, but what about the everyday manager that's in the middle that doesn't get all the visibility?
So for those managers or leaders that are leaning in right now? Based on the interviews you've done already, what are the top two things that the best bosses do?
Oh, so many things. The one that I am so passionate about, as I call it, is broccoli between your teeth feedback. And I use that term very specifically because the way that they deliver really candid, really tough feedback sometimes is with the same compassion as telling somebody they have broccoli between their teeth. Their priority is not for the business. It's not because it annoys them. It's not because they really wish you would just quit it. They do it because they compassionately don't want to see you have this unconscious embarrassment. They don't want you to walk around doing something that you didn't even know you were doing and it was limiting you. And so, best bosses, they will deliver that type of feedback, but it's always in service because they genuinely care about the person in front of them and they want to see that person grow from it. And that is the number one priority of giving the feedback. Number two is the impact on the business. Number two might be impact on the team. Maybe number three is it annoys them. But when they deliver it, they feel it from the heart of, God, I value you and I really want to see you excel.
And that's what came to mind for me. When I think of leadership, one of the main things is leaders who value the people they lead.
And that's how you show that. It's not by protecting them and not sharing that feedback. And that's interesting because a lot of leaders that love people and do value people are terrified of giving tough feedback. So for me, when I'm coaching people, a lot of the times it's how can I package the feedback in a way that demonstrates how much you care about this individual so that you're more confident to give the feedback because it will help them grow. That's my number one favorite. Yes. And then the second I'll mention too, I think really powerful best bosses don't require other people to mirror their stress levels. And so hear me out. There's something that's interesting that happens is a lot of the times when leaders are under massive pressure and they feel very stressed, they feel like the only way they can check in to see if anybody else is working as hard or cares as much is to see how stressed they look. I know I see this in private equity. I see this in management consulting, these really high cutthroat environments where it's like, if I'm terrified the sky is falling, your face better show it too.
Oh boy. Mm-hmm.
Best bosses know how to allow you to stay in a healthy stress environment to perform well. They don't need you to be negatively stressed in order to win. And so there's a lot to that. I don't need to cut you down with the hope that it's going to make you work harder. I don't need you to show me how much you care by losing sleep and answering emails at 11 o'clock at night. I'm allowing you to focus your energy on the things that are performance based and not on the mirroring of stress to show me that you're engaged.
And it goes back to the number one, adding value to people. Your work is super important. Where can we connect with you?
So find me at christinelaperriere.com. If you type in a pretty close spelling of christinelaperriere.com or best boss ever, it's very easy to find me. And my website has access to a course that I'm teaching. And I'm also kind of introducing some fresh concept. Dessert First Living is something kind of new and fresh that we're bringing to the table. You can obviously find the podcast, and I'm always available for coaching and training discussions inside of an organization.
Thank you so much. Now, as someone committed to continuous learning, what are you learning right now?
The thing that I'm really paying attention to, I'll just share. His name is Terry Real, Real. He is a therapist that works on relationship repair. So I've been interested in him in my own world, just working through my own personal relationships and things. But what I've kind of become obsessed with his stuff because there's so much about relationship repair that really does apply to the work world when those relationships get damaged, when we create silos. And so even though he's truly based on therapy, he's also very focused on men and depression and some of the ways that men show up in damaged relationships. And I'm just having aha moments all over the place about how much we can use some of that insight to make our workplaces better.
And as a woman, as a female coming in, understanding that masculine brain and that masculine energy
Right.
is super important. Thank you so much. Now, when you reflect on leadership today, what are your biggest concerns and what gives you the most hope?
Biggest concern that I have is that leaders are too busy to lead. I keep joking, but maybe I'm not joking, that my next book is going to be Too Busy to Lead, because my biggest concern is that leaders don't believe that that is the number one priority that they should be focused on during the day. And they're often dragged into 1,000 other firefighting activities that are not actually leading others. I'm concerned because the way our technology and the way our environment is set up, most of us are inundated with Slack channels and WhatsApp groups and 17 layers of technology. And so, just by nature, we're so overwhelmed that leading others, coaching others, mentoring others, it's very proactive versus reactive. And we're being so trained to be reactive that I'm worried that it's not actually a priority for a lot of leaders, and not because they don't want it to be, but just because they're trying to respond to so many bells and whistles and dinging flags in a day. So that's my biggest concern. And I guess the optimism, though, on the flip side, I've been thinking about this a lot. I really wonder if some of the AI tools that we have are going to help us create work environments that fit nicely around individual wiring. So for people who are really good sprinters who can get a lot done in a short amount of time, but then need to take a breath, versus, our marathoners who they're consistent, but don't make them work long hours. They need consistency. All of us have these different styles and preferences in which we perform at our best. And I'm kind of curious how AI might help managers still get the best out of people without having to put them all in exactly the same box.
And it will take leaders who are open to that.
Right. We'll have to believe that it's important. We talk about diversity, and I think of diversity as being so many layers to what I see as far as diversity. There's so many different personality types and generational types and backgrounds and biases and things like that. And we can start to build around some of that.
So tuning into you is a great place to start.
Thank you. I do have a newsletter. It goes out twice a month. I don't send you 1,000 sales pitches. So it is hopefully a safe thing to subscribe to without feeling like you're getting inundated. But at christinelaperriere.com, I have a blog that I write called The Whip, and that's wisdom, humor, and inspiration for professional peeps. And it's just my passion project. So every time I have a really cool coaching conversation, I try to write up what the aha moment was out of that coaching conversation and share that in a newsletter twice a month.
Thank you so much. Now we have a surprise question from a former guest. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. So this is a basic question, but a very important one, especially if we have new leaders that are tuning in. Jessica Parker wants to know, what advice would you give new leaders who are beginning their career?
One thing that I'm pretty passionate about right now is I think it's time for us to start to really talk about, like, what does professionalism look like and what does trust building look like? Because at the start of a career, performance currency is key. Proving that you can do the job well and have high credibility, to me, is out of the gate. But then over time, relationship currency becomes of equal importance, and it ultimately becomes of more importance even than your performance currency, ironically. And so careers kind of have this, like, two elements that are in play. Early career, focus on the performance currency, get noticed, get paid, make sure that people understand that you are credible. But in the same exact breath, build those relationships early, because later down the road, the relationship currency is going to become kind of the game changing thing mid career to senior career.
And I love the insight there. You mentioned trust. Trust to me is the foundation of leadership. How do you build trust?
This is something I'm working on right now. I'm trying to build a program to help early professionals understand, what does that look like? So trust is built. For example, we know a lot of these things. When you say what you're going to do and you do what you're going to do, it also is when the assignment comes and I grab it, or when I double check my work. There's these little things that we do that help the leader assign more challenging things to me because they trust me. They build that safety net around me. They know that I'm not going to blame somebody else for a failed assignment. They know that I'm not going to become defensive over trying to get that feedback. I keep saying the missing component of my whole line of work has been that I've never really trained like an individual about how to be a rock star. We're training the bosses on how to be the best boss ever, but have we trained the entry level folks early career on how to really be a rock star? And that is building trust. But you do that through 15 different things that you do, these tiny little attention to detail moments that allow you to build the trust from others that gives them the desire to want to see you advance.
And this is really deep work because my experience has been that you can't really build trust if you don't have trust or you don't give trust. In other words,
Right.
it's a fine line professionally and personally, because if you haven't dealt with your shit, um,
Yeah. If you're not trusting, yes.
and I find that there's so many leaders who can build these walls and think that they are protecting themselves. And in essence, really, they're hurting other people without even knowing it. To become the best boss ever, we can start somewhere, but it does mean looking at yourself. It does mean taking a deep dive into who you are, leading yourself well before you can
Yeah.
lead others.
Absolutely. And I think it's a lost art because we're not teaching that in university or in college. And then I'm seeing a lot of managers, they're onboarding brand new hires. They don't know how to teach that themselves. So you're usually being given the most junior staff in your first management job. And meanwhile, if you can't teach others how to be rock stars and trustworthy, you're going to have a really hard time managing that team. So I do think it's a lost art and a skill that we need to focus on.
Absolutely. Now, as a listener of this podcast, Christine, what's a question that you'd like a future leadership guest to respond to? Like, what are you curious about?
I am curious about what habits leaders are trying to unlearn. You know, one thing that's interesting that happens over the course of a career is the thing that got you successful then becomes the thing that holds you back at the next level. And so many of us can feel it. You can feel it in your relationships. You can feel it even as a parent. Like there's always this moment where you're like, that thing that I was doing that was so successful last week, making sure that I've got, yes, blockades from keeping toddlers from smashing their faces, then eventually becomes too protective for them to become functional walkers. Like, so you kind of end up having these moments where you're like, the thing I was doing well isn't working, and I have to unlearn something that used to work well for me. I'm super curious how they would answer that question.
I love that. Well, let me try to answer it. So, a habit that I'm trying to unlearn, and I think this has been my theme throughout the year, what I'm focused on is going more with the flow. What I'm trying
Mm,
to learn is being so rigid or
yes.
taking action all the time and being more in control. I'm trying to just kind of let go and
Yeah.
being more go with the flow kind of person. And I've always been that way. So unlearning that is always on my to-do list.
You know, it's a great example of exactly what I'm talking about. So the rigidity got you somewhere. It helped you at a certain stage and it was important. And you learned that it was positive because it served you. And then something's happening now where it's limiting. And so that to me is the never ending challenge for so many of us. It's like trying to evolve is not easy.
And if we sit with that and understand that this will always be the case, if we want to grow, we are expansive. There's so much to learn.
Right.
That's exciting. So is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we wrap up?
I just hope people take away that idea of emotional real estate, balance time, money, and emotional real estate when you're making decisions or you're thinking about how you want to juggle lots of things. Put all three of those factors on the table. I think it adds a powerful dynamic. And I think second is, ask yourself, am I the best boss ever? And if I'm not reaching for that, why am I not reaching for that? I think it's a really good question to ask. Lots of people get scared of the term best boss ever, which is kind of why I used it, because I want it to be bold enough that it's a little scary.
Yeah.
If you hear that term and you go, oh no, I think that in itself is something worth reflecting on.
Well, I love it. It's a great way to close this out. Thank you so much for adding value to me and to our listeners.
This was great. Thank you.